Multiple YouTubers have done playthroughs of Sonic games with only certain characters, to the point where someone like Nathaniel Bandy would do one, but there are a couple I want to focus on for right now. I believe the person who has done the most is Epic Dusk, having played through Sonic Adventure 2 with most of the characters at this point. Their videos were the primary inspiration behind this one, but I also looked to Sonic Supremacist Sonic 06 as shadow video a couple times through the making of this one, since I wanted to see if there were any transferable techniques. They've also done a few other videos in the same vein, but that's the only one I've personally seen. Anyway, as a bit of a preamble, I am primarily a Dark Souls challenge runner. I've spent hundreds of hours in my life playing Dark Souls in different ways with different weapons or restrictions. I have done a few other games. I've played through both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask without a sword, I've beaten both Death's Door and Tunic without rolling, and I've done Another Crab's Treasure without a shell, but I've never done anything outside of a Souls-like, so this is kinda new territory to me. What better place to start, though, than my favorite Sonic game as my favorite Sonic character? You can judge me all you want about 06 being my favorite. It's fun, I like it, leave me alone. Playing as Blaze in an official capacity is one of my favorite things ever, and this challenge will hopefully satisfy my craving for a new game with Blaze playable in it. Unfortunately, the character switcher mod I'm using doesn't change the cutscenes at all, so there's no funny cutscene shenanigans, but I did replace every single playable character with Blaze, meaning anytime there's a buddy with us, such as here at the beginning where it would ordinarily be Sonic and Tails, we have multiple Blazes. Hopefully that satisfies the yearning for funny looking shenanigans. Anyway, our very first challenge is to somehow reach Wave Ocean. This is one of the easiest things to do in the game most of the time. You just do the Winder of a Shoemaker quest to get some rings, buy the Lightspeed Dash item, do a dash, and move on. Unfortunately, even if we buy the item, Blaze can't do the Lightspeed Dash, meaning we need to figure out some other way to move on. I spent forever trying different methods of reaching the other side. Initially, I just tried jumping as far as I could, both from the ground and from the roof nearby, and didn't get anywhere close. I did accidentally figure out, though, that you can do a small hop off of the water immediately after you touch it. The timing is pretty tight, but nothing that hard. That still doesn't give nearly enough distance, though. I tried standing between physics objects to maybe trigger a proxy jump or something, but I couldn't find anything of the sort. Before starting this challenge, I did know of a glitch that could be performed by Blaze, where if you find a ledge that's just the right height, you can do the homing attack she has while standing still and it will send you flying forward. The only place I've seen it done was the lighthouse you encounter in her section of Wave Ocean in Silver Story though, and trying every ledge in the accessible area yielded nothing. I tried to clip out of bounds for a bit to maybe find a ledge I could use somewhere else in the city, but the only way I found was to jump around the invisible wall next to the entrance to Wave Ocean, and I just barely couldn't reach the ground on the other side, even with a double jump and a water hop. I thought maybe dashing would give me the distance I needed, since height wasn't an issue, and to my surprise, dashing onto the water makes you bounce off of it without consuming your water hop, making it easy to get to the other side into the rest of the city. I didn't find a ledge to do the glitch on though, unfortunately. The entrance to Dusty Desert, the next stage we need to go to after Wave Ocean, does exist right now, but unfortunately it's entirely disabled. With a bit of platforming to get onto a roof, you can get higher up near the entrance to Wave Ocean, but the distance is a little bit farther, making them balance out and giving us no more headway. The camera does actually switch angles along the path you would normally lightspeed dash across, so I figured I could try pause buffering in order to make sure I was always pressing the stick directly toward where I needed to go, so I didn't start going backwards when the camera switched, and that did get me quite a bit further, but just barely wasn't enough distance. At this point, I was completely stuck. I had no ideas and just wasn't sure what to try, so I went ahead and watched some glitch showcases. In A+ Start's Son of a Glitch episode 19, at about 3 minutes and 15 seconds in, they show off a glitch where Silver can bounce across water by holding the action button just before touching the water. I wondered if this would work as Blaze, since she has a fire spin attack using that input, and I figured it was worth a shot. It turns out that the fire spin just lets you skip across the water, the height you bounce varying based on your fall speed, and if you time it just after jumping, the spin will last for significantly longer, letting us easily cross this gap if we just start from on top of the nearby building for slightly higher bounces. I learned later in this run that this glitch was coined as the Advanced Spinning Fire Claw 17 years ago by Darkspine Sonic, who seems to glitch hunt and speedrun Sonic games to this day, which is really cool to figure out. I'm glad I discovered this on my own, but it's also really cool to know that I wasn't the first. Whether or not the dash allowing you to bounce off water was known about or not, I have no idea, since you play as Blaze in one level and a few short sections, but it is cool to know that I can do it, even if it doesn't necessarily end up being useful until later. So we finally enter Wave Ocean and die immediately. As soon as we spawn, we hit a booster that sends us flying around a loop into water to our death. Blaze does do this loop when she goes through Wave Ocean for her level, but she doesn't skid across the water. She just jumps right over with a ramp. If the ramp was there, I'm positive this level would be possible. Hell, if we could somehow avoid hitting the booster or stop the automation before the end, I'm sure jumping over the water would be easier than getting into this level in the first place. Luckily, there is indeed a way to avoid hitting the booster entirely. Unfortunately, I didn't know about this for a while. I ended up joining the Sonic 06 speedrunning Discord at one point asking if something was possible, and it turned out that there was a solution here. Anyway, if we just hold the action button, pause, release the action button, and restart the stage, it'll buffer a dash and avoid the booster entirely. From there, we can jump down to some lower terrain and skip across the water, being careful to avoid some death planes that normally wouldn't affect Sonic at all. The next decent portion of the level can be played fairly normally. You just need to make sure to take the rainbow ring instead of going the long way, since the long way requires water skidding. You can also use the lighthouse zip thingy I was talking about earlier to reach the next section, but it isn't exactly consistent, especially if you don't know what you're doing. From here, the advanced spinning fire claw is a lot more precise since it doesn't last forever and we need to take a couple long sections. On the way down the ramp after this checkpoint, make sure to land on the side near the bottom, then use the spin to activate the orca and carefully make your way onto the pillar it destroys so we can restart the spin. The rocks falling can push you under the water, so be careful. From there, you can go straight to the pier you normally run across and do that as normal before Blaze glitterally locks onto the orca's fin and the other Blaze can make her way through tail section. Most of the area can be skipped entirely with a single advanced spinning fire claw, which I'll just call water skipping from now on. Tails can also go this way just by jumping and carefully metering your flight. Then you just do a couple jumps to reach the switch, and Blaze dies because the animation is wrong. She doesn't get launched by the orca, just barely. We were stopped by a non-existent animation despite the fact that the action itself works. I know from messing around in debug mode that the loading trigger is there, and if we can get there, we can most likely easily get through the Mach speed section. The problem is, I don't know of a way to get up there. I turned on infinite lives and infinite spinning to see if maybe I could bounce up to it somehow, but it doesn't seem like I'm getting nearly enough height. I tried using the lighthouse zip, but couldn't get anywhere near where I needed to be. There is another lighthouse and tail section, but it's way too tall to reach the top of. The end of this level is so tantalizingly close, but I just can't do it. This seems like the end. As it turns out, you can't beat Sonic 06 as only Blaze the Cat. I knew there were things Blaze couldn't do, and I expected this, but it sucks to not be able to finish the very first level because of one thing that feels so close. Well, I'll switch back to Sonic, finish the level, and we can move on. In order to enter the second level, Dusty Desert, we need to first rescue a girl stuck on a roof. As Sonic, you need to get the anti-gravity power-up and slide under the wall, but Blaze can just jump over it. Before the level though, we need to fight Egg Cerberus, which shouldn't really be an issue. She can't grab the horn. What? Why? There is a way to despawn the boss and win anyway on emulator, which is how I'm playing, but you need to get the boss down to half health first, which I can't do, so it looks like we're already calling Sonic back in. Dusty Desert is one of my favorite and most played levels though, and I'm sure it's possible. We can't just walk on the sand like Sonic with Elise, but to make up for that, Blaze can jump up to the pillars that Sonic needs to hurry to get onto and take the shorter path much easier. This path makes it extremely evident that Blaze's homing attack isn't quite as capable as Sonic's, at least not by just tapping the button, since Sonic uses the jump button and can bounce higher after doing the attack. Blaze can bounce, but you need to carefully time your jump button press as to not trigger a double jump. Even without that though, the double jump is more than enough to hit the spring and skip fighting the 3 enemies here. She can even do the wall jumps to skip the tower climb, even if she T-poses after landing. I was a little worried about the gap you're supposed to lightspeed dash over, but a double jump is enough to cross. What I didn't consider though, was the massive gap of quicksand at the end of the level, but luckily water skipping works on the sand here, so we can make it through no problem. Hopefully this trend of actually being able to complete levels continues for a bit. This whole playthrough is obviously non-canon, but the Silver fight is easily the least canon thing. I was somehow able to hurt Silver before he grabbed anything. I think it was because he was in the air. I had no idea the fight worked like that. Otherwise, just wait for him to grab stuff to throw at you and attack like normal. The warehouse fight is exactly the same as normal, if not easier, since Blaze is probably more combat capable than Sonic before he gets the bounce bracelet, which you can't even have yet. The spin and her faster homing attack trivializes a lot of enemies. We now have 3 Blazes running around, which is one of my favorite things I've ever seen. Anyway, one more short combat challenge lets us enter White Acropolis. We do have to run through the snowboard section, which makes it a bit longer, but ultimately just easier. Until the avalanche. Luckily, it's possible to jump over it if you do so on the first slope. You'll end up taking damage, but you can make it over. It does block us from moving on at the end as well, but it's entirely possible to squeeze through with the right positioning. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and sometimes you go straight through, but it is possible. The only other issue in this stage is immediately after the avalanche. The gap is very, very far. You're supposed to have a lot more speed with a snowboard that we just don't have here. It is just barely possible to make it over with a pause buffer double jump while making sure to hold the jump button for as long as possible to make sure you get the maximum height and distance. But even with that, it took a few tries, and running down a slope for a minute every time I wanted to try a single double jump was more than a little frustrating. Luckily, the novelty of running a game other than Dark Souls was really helping me through this one. I expected Tails' section to offer a little resistance, since he can fly and has to fly over a couple gaps, but Blaze's double jump makes it more than high enough. You can even get enough distance to just jump over most of the spotlights and lasers. Nothing in this level really ended up being an issue at all. Crisis City starts really slow since you're supposed to have a board to go down the slope, just like White Acropolis. There is a pit you need to double jump over, but it's not precise at all. The main chunk of the level doesn't really offer any special challenges either. The double jump actually kind of trivializes a lot of the random platforming, and lack of an automatic bounce even makes one homing attack chain way easier than it would be with Sonic, at least for me in my first playthrough. The floating grapple section was much the same. The double jump helped a lot with the platforming, and nothing really stood out. I was worried about the Mach speed section, but it turns out that we can go as slow as we want. The tornado will never catch up. The camera's a little funky, but it's mostly just slowly running along this incredibly long road in a section that we're supposed to be much faster in, so there's no issue here. Flamecore is honestly pretty similar for the most part, just a lot of platforming that's easier than normal because of Blaze's unique abilities. She's slower than Sonic, so the path with all the falling rocks is nearly impossible to get through without getting hit at least a couple times, but that's not really an issue. The combat is also just easier than it would be with Sonic, since Blaze outputs damage far faster. Once Sonic gets the bounce bracelet, he does do more damage, but Blaze is superior for now. It was here, however, that I learned Blaze is kind of incapable of using springs. She goes up, but can't dash or homing attack, and they completely destroy her momentum, so any spring that sends you straight up is just a no-go most of the time. Luckily, there are a few paths through this area, and at least one of them doesn't require a spring like that. It probably would have been possible to platform up the falling platforms, but I'm glad I didn't have to. Some of the platforming in Knuckles section is a little bit tight, but nothing she can't do, and she can activate the glowing things no problem with her fire spin. From there, the rest of the level is really no issue. The first Iblis fight is no different from normal too, shockingly. I wasn't expecting her to just be able to do the fight no problem, like maybe hitting Iblis would send her in the wrong direction or whatever, but no, it just works. I was even able to cut down on the waiting by using her mobility to reach the glowing bait things quicker. But alas, our progress had to come to a screeching halt at some point, and here we are, incapable of entering the next level. Ordinarily, you'd need to buy the bounce bracelet and use it on this pipe thing to enter the level, but I just can't find a way in. Blaze doesn't have a consistent way to clip into walls like the three main characters, at least that I could find, and nowhere else that I could actually get out of bounds would let me get out of this area to try something else or into the level that we need to go into otherwise. As far as I know, getting to the portal itself wouldn't even help since it's entirely disabled until you go through the pipe in the first place. Well, that's one more thing Blaze can't do, but we can use her in the level at least. She is slower than Sonic, but that doesn't really matter when you know what you're doing, since the game gives you room for error anyway. There's honestly not much notable in the level itself, like Flamecore or Crisis City. Even the Mach speed section here doesn't offer any resistance. Don't worry, there's more interesting stuff to come, just not here. The Egg Genesis fight is a little bit funky. You can get on top by homing attacking the enemies like normal, but as far as I can tell, you can't actually homing attack the boss itself once you're on top. Instead, you have to use the fire spin, but there's a pretty large area to do so on top of its head. You don't actually need to hit the face. I ended up dying to the boss near the end, and while fighting it again, the fight just ended. I think this is a Xenia thing, at least as far as I can tell, and I'm not really complaining since the fight itself was possible anyway. Reaching Tropical Jungle can be done in exactly the same way as Wave Ocean earlier. The level itself starts off pretty normally, but for some reason Blaze doesn't actually spawn on the booster pad, so we have to walk down the slope. Anyway, I try to take the shorter path, but there's a vine you're supposed to swing on, and Blaze can't actually interact with it. The normal way also has a vine later too, unfortunately, and I think that gap is just too far to jump across. Even if I could make it over this jump though, there's another spot later that necessitates using another special kind of vine that I don't think any character other than Sonic holding Elise can interact with, so this level is unfortunately just straight up impossible, without really any hope of beating it. This probably counts as spoilers, but that is in fact the last thing in Sonic's story that Blaze can't do. Tails' Wave Ocean is up next, and it's mostly pretty similar to Sonic's to start off. We don't need to worry about buffering a dash to avoid the boosters, thankfully, and we can make it pretty far without too many shenanigans. Maybe a water bouncer too, but once we get past the first Orca, things get a bit more difficult. Normally you just fly to the dash ring, but Blaze can't quite jump that far. Luckily, there are destructible pillars, and just like in Sonic's Wave Ocean, we can destroy them and stand on them. From there, you can just jump to the ring, and it takes us straight to where Tails' section started in Wave Ocean, which we can complete just like the original with the goal ring right where the switch was to close the gate originally. To enter the next level, we have to complete 3 tests, the first of which is just a memory test going through the correct portals. Think the forest maze in Super Mario RPG or something. The next is a short combat challenge where we have to defeat all the enemies without any rings, which just means doing a hit list, and it's not that hard. The third is the Trial of Love, where you need to pick between Amy and Elise. It doesn't matter which one you pick, so I chose Amy because Blaze and Amy would be a cute couple, and I had canon Blaze as a lesbian. Luckily, Blaze can ride the eagles just fine, though the animation doesn't really exist, so she just T-poses. Either way, we can enter the hardest level in the entirety of Sonic's story for this challenge, Kingdom Valley. The first part of the level can be done as normal, just grind along the rails made of wind and whatever, but as soon as we encounter the first rope, we find our first problem. Just like with the springs, Blaze loses all momentum and can't dash off of them. This is significantly more of a problem here, since the ropes are generally isolated during the homing attack chains or other similar scenarios. This is largely fine for now, though while attempting to find an alternate path that didn't require homing attacking off of any ropes, I learned about the homing attack bounce I mentioned back in Dusty Desert. You can follow this homing attack chain, but a much easier way to progress is by jumping off a rope into a spring that carries us forward. There's also a booster up ahead you need to avoid, as it will send you directly into the abyss without the ability to lightspeed dash. The next eagle takes us directly to Silver's section. You're supposed to use telekinesis to open these bars, but obviously Blaze can't do that. Luckily, it looks like you can just go around. Okay, there's an anti-fun wall. A really big anti-fun wall. They really didn't want Sonic in this area. I don't think the invisible wall actually reaches the wall, so going around it with a water bounce is probably an option, but the way I found is way more fun, I think. There's a platform that we can't reach from the starting point of the area that looks like it would offer an easy path forward, and luckily there is a way up there. You can actually jump off of the eagle early and get up there no problem, so you just wait a moment, jump, then dash over to the platform. From there, you can just jump off of the wall scenery to reach the main path and use one more water bounce to reach the end trigger for Silver's section, spawning an eagle to move us forward. There are a few combat rooms that are pretty easy to get through, followed by a small rope platforming section that's centered around a pillar, meaning you can easily move far enough to reach the top rope and make one more precise jump to reach the worst area in the entire level. Welcome to Pain. There's a small circle of ropes here that you'd normally just do some homing attacks off of, but obviously Blaze can't do that. Luckily, there's actually an eagle here that flies in a circle and crosses right over the rope. It is just slightly too high to reach though, unfortunately. It crosses at 2 points, and on my way over, I swear to God, purely by chance, I learned that you can time a double jump just as you land on the rope, and it will give you the extra height necessary and refresh your double jump so we can barely reach the eagle using a glitch that I'm pretty sure is nearly, if not actually, frame perfect. It's crazy that there's a random eagle that I've never noticed before, combined with an extremely niche glitch that probably hasn't ever been found before, or at least hasn't been documented in a place that I could find, given the weird circumstances we're in right now. It just barely makes this level possible. You do have to time the double jump glitch at the same time that the eagle crosses over you in its cycle, so you'll probably have to do the jump multiple times, but it is indeed possible. There's one more combat room, and then what is probably the hardest non-glitch jump in the entire game immediately after, which, if you mess up, you need to do the frame perfect jump again, so good luck. I didn't find a way to make it across this gap for quite a while, but after everything I went through to get here, especially finding, as far as I know, a brand new glitch, there was no way I was going to let a big gap stop me. Jumping from the ground, even at full speed, doesn't work. You just don't get enough height, and using the broken pillar doesn't give you enough speed. If you just homing attack off the enemies, you'll hit the rope and get stuck completely. Instead, you have to homing attack the second enemy, hold the jump button before hitting it so you can get the height from the homing attack but don't double jump, then dash at just the right angle and you can barely make it to the very edge of the platform. Making that jump was incredibly satisfying after everything else. That's pretty much it for this level, just a bit more running and a short combat encounter before another Mach speed section. I was kind of worried that the water wouldn't act like a normal wall for whatever reason, but you can easily jump all the gaps and run along the water just like normal, so this level is entirely possible. To enter the final level, Aquatic Base, we have to hit 3 bells, which is kind of trivial, and we can enter. The first bit of the level is completely fine, but you can't take the fast path because Blaze can't lightspeed dash. You can in the second room though, which is nice, since there's only a couple homing attacks to reach the rainbow ring. All the combat is pretty easy, as usual, especially when you use the magnet things to obliterate the enemies instantly. Blaze can't homing attack them for whatever reason, but a fire spin works just as well. Luckily, she's capable of using the pulleys fine too. The hardest bit of the level is probably where you'd normally ride the giant silver ball thing, since while you can stand on it, it doesn't move. The pillars that are emitting the lasers function just fine as platforms though. The jumps are a little bit difficult just because of how small the pillars are, but at this point, difficulty doesn't sway me in the least. Tails section is also pretty easy. The jumps honestly aren't even that precise, and you can easily just jump over most of the lasers just like Tails. The final section with the enemies in the air luckily isn't even an issue, since there are places to land after the homing attacks. Blaze can break through the glass just like Sonic, and Knuckles section even ends up being pretty easy. Same story as Tails section, the jumps aren't even really that difficult. They're far, and you do need to try, but after everything else, it's really not that notable. As it turns out, Sonic's final level is entirely possible as only Blaze. I was expecting Egg Wyvern to be impossible, since Blaze can't hold onto the horn, just like Cerberus, but if you homing attack then land, the fight just ends a bit later. I think this is a despawn, and is the same thing that happens when you use the Sky Blue gem to end the fight quickly. I'm pretty sure this is possible on console as well, so that's weirdly possible. Well, there are only a few things preventing Blaze from completing Sonic's story completely, and I don't really have any hope for any of them. Wave Ocean's load zone is just too high. I really can't think of any way to get up there, despite how close it looks. Egg Cerberus would basically require modding the game to let Blaze grab the horn, so that one is also out. If there was some way to get to the top of where the special vine takes you in Tropical Jungle, then that might be possible, but I honestly highly doubt it. Finally, entering Radical Train just doesn't seem very hopeful either, which is really unfortunate since the level itself is entirely possible. If anyone finds any way to complete any of these levels or has any ideas, definitely please let me know in the comments. I don't know if I'll make a video on Shadow and Silver stories, since most of them will likely be impossible, at least from what I've tried so far. I'm willing to try and see if the levels are interesting, and I'll make the video regardless if people want to see it, but I'm not really holding out hope. End of the World, the final story level, could be interesting, but it's more likely that the level would just be really easy, and obviously Solaris itself would be entirely impossible as Blaze, since you need one of the Super Hedgehog's abilities to even deal damage in the first place. Either way, this run was super fun, and I had a great time doing it. I'm also planning on doing the same concept with other characters as well, namely Silver I think would be interesting. Maybe Sonic holding Elise too, but I can't imagine that one would be too unique. Either way, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.